Dr. Tunde Akikomi, um, please introduce the book to us and also share with us the story behind the book. Thank you.
Nigeria will have been an independent nation for 58 years in just over a month's time. So for the purposes of this argument, Nigeria is 57 years old. For more than half of that time, Nigeria has been ruled by a military regime, consisting largely of army officers and always led by one. But if you broaden that argument out a little bit, and let us look at the 19 years since we have ostensibly had a democratic government. 11 of those years have been led by retired generals who were themselves military presidents. The Nigerian born in 1968 is 50 years old this year. For 37 of the years of his life, Nigeria has been led by a soldier in one guise or the other. Now, the population of Nigeria, we are told, is about 180 odd million, and 65% of those are under the age of 25. So the vast majority of the people of this country have only ever known people who were or are in uniform running it. It is therefore impossible in my humble submission, and I yield to my more distinguished lawyers who flank me, it is impossible to consider the history of this country, whether long past or in more recent times, without the army as an institution looming large. In fact, I would go further. You cannot study or make any definitive or exhaustive or indeed valid study of the history of Nigeria without actually taking into account the history of its army. What hubris set out to do, and I chose that word carefully because I think it really illustrated the point I was trying to make. The military involved itself in politics on the basis that it could do a better job than the civilian politicians it kicked out. But I would ask you to consider a couple of things. First is, in the 6 years or so in which Nigeria was led by civilians, there was lots and lots of arguments. There was lots and lots of civilian unrest. There was lots and lots of riots and stuff, election rigging, all of that stuff. But we never fought a war. We soldiers took over, and in 18 months, we were slaughtering each other on an industrial scale. Second is that if we accept the premise that you cannot divorce the history of Nigeria from the history of its army, then in order to properly understand both, you have to examine each of them, how they evolved, and how they impacted on each other. In other words, how the Nigerian army as an institution impacted on the history of Nigeria as a country, and how the evolution of Nigeria as a country and its politics impacted on the army. The central submission here is that neither army nor country benefited from that association. Nigeria's politics has been severely damaged by the involvement of the army in its running for so long, and the operational effectiveness of the army to do what it really is meant to do has also been significantly damaged as a result of its involvement in politics. And so that's the basis, that's the background to hubris, and I thank you very much.
The story of A Platter of Gold, but I couldn't resist the temptation to comment about hubris. Because when a friend of mine bought it for me, knowing my interest, and when I saw it, I thought, oh, another book on the coup or something like that. So I didn't read it for a number of days. But when I opened it and I saw the reason why he had written it at the beginning, and I've listened to what you've just said, It is absolutely true that the military is interwoven in the history of Nigeria. And I say that as an introduction to my background on a platter of gold. Because you see, if you know anything about imperial colonialism, you'll realize that it is extractive in its objective, it's oppressive in its purpose, but its method is military. It's military in its method. And so it was probably not only subliminal that when Frederick Lugard took the title of the first governor of this united country, he took a very strange title called Governor General, because he was a military man, and it was a military government. Imperial colonialism is a military government. We should never, ever forget that and look and just brush it aside as some benign civilian relationship with foreigners. It was a government of force, occupation by force, and rule and authority of force. Incidentally, he was the only one who took that title amongst all the 8 governors until you got to Robertson, the last chap to leave. He revived the title and used, everybody else was just governor. But he loved that title, Governor General. And that's how I came about the book. It was thought to be a continuation of Possessed, which was the story of the making of the Crown Colony of Lagos, a country that preceded Nigeria, not a nation state like everywhere else in the country, but an actual country that was created, the first colony in these parts of West Africa, that is now called Nigeria. And I then said, so having stopped at 1906, which was the end of the Crown Colony, I thought, well, let me tell the story of Nigeria through the lives of the 8 governors that ruled over colonial Nigeria at the end of the Crown Colony. And that's what I set about to do. But as I started, I found the Nigerians took over and the governors general and the governors went into the background. So when you read the book, you'll still see the lives of the governors, but they're only now the skeleton to mark the difference in tenure. And it was a story of ordinary people who did extraordinary things and have been omitted from our national consciousness. And I thought it was important that we heard their story and came to our own conclusions about what the experience was and who the real heroes in this country are, whether they are the people who are normally bandied around as founding fathers of this country, a term that I roundly reject, that this country has 3 or 4 founding fathers, one Yoruba, one Igbo. Conveniently, Yoruba, one Igbo, one Hausa. It's rubbish, in my opinion. It's just rubbish. The founding fathers of this country are some ordinary people whose graves are unmarked. And hopefully, when you read the book, you will learn and meet them in the pages from the beginning to the end. So that's just my background.